losing your job. Dive deep into humane leadership crafted for today's fast-paced business world. Don't miss our weekly YouTube live sessions every Thursday at 8:10 a.m. Central and 10:10 a.m. Eastern Time, where we engage in tackling pressing leadership topics. Listen to our podcast on all major streaming platforms and join us as we explore the essence of humane leadership in today's dynamic business landscape. I'm Chris Olerking, a Fortune 100 IT leader, alongside Roberto Torres, a seasoned startup engineering leader. Today, we will discuss a quote by Steve Jobs that management is about persuading people to do things they don't want to do, while leadership is about inspiring people to do things they never thought they could. A very interesting topic. Hope you're doing well, Roberto. Happy
Yeah,
Friday. It's really not Thursday, Friday today. Happy Friday.
yeah, I'm pretty good, even though we haven't had a dry season and we have a flooding season. So yeah, pretty good, man.
Well, I hope you don't have any disasters.
Well, I always have my swimming suit, so good.
Very good. Well, that's a very interesting quote. I did a little research. He may not have said exactly those words, but certainly his philosophy would be aligned with that statement. Management, or as you and I frequently call it, being the boss, is about making sure people do things that they really don't want to do, bossing them around. And leadership is about inspiring people. And I think when you need leadership the most is for the most creative jobs. I find that, in our world of IT, you kind of had development jobs, programming jobs. You had roles that interacted with the business a lot, but you also had what I call the back end or operations staff that has a lot of compliance and very rigorous steps that you have to do things and execute following very precise procedures, which many times that role and those kinds of do need a lot more management, right? You don't want creativity in terms of how you decide to grant people access rights to databases or things. But if you're creating a new app, like in your development environment, you want leadership because you want creativity. You want people to come up with very unique and new innovative ways to solve whatever problem your new application is. So I'm betting you probably almost always have to be doing leadership kinds of things and don't have as much need to do management, meaning enforcing compliance or enforcing very strict rules on how things are done.
Yeah, indeed. I do it most of the time. Maybe it is 80-20, 80 leadership, 20 management. Because as you mentioned, management, it has to be done when the process is straight, when we had to follow a process and you cannot deviate. It's not like as we were talking in a bank. Okay, let's give the construction of the database to the intern, so he to be motivated. Oh no, you have to set it up for the people who run that process. In this case, it will be the database administrator. So yes, usually I do that. And even though the how can I say that the excitement of the people saying, I can do this. No, no, hold your horses. If it's part of leadership, I will tell you so. If it's otherwise part of management, I will tell you so. So I think we have to choose and not be biased about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think, at the level that Steve Jobs was operating in the latter part of his career, right? So Apple's established, he's a very high level executive. Creativity and leadership is usually going to be a much higher ratio. If you're a leader who's down in the operational lower levels of the business, whatever the business is, whether it's banking or a shipping business or who knows, manufacturing business, I think frequently at some of those lower level tasks where in manufacturing, let's say, you're working in IT in a manufacturing plant, and your job and your team's job is to make sure that all the computer controls are working properly and picking up how many quantities of things are built and how much is in inventory to parts to go into the process and so on. You don't want a lot of creativity that's all of a sudden going to change how we're keeping track of how much raw materials is pending, because you go changing that live on the system that's running your factory floor. Very creative that you're going to do something a different way, but if you're suddenly leaping into that, you could really mess up the whole manufacturing process, and things could get very expensive very quickly. However, inspiring your team to talk about that is leadership, and talking about, if we did more real-time analysis of the aging of our inventory and so on, we might be able to make better purchasing decisions. Having that discussion and saying, hey, that's a good idea. Let's go to the whiteboard and let's think about what the impacts might be. Let's get the business in here to talk about it. Then you're inspiring creativity, and that's good leadership. But it's this delicate balance. I think lower in the company, you'll probably do a lot more management, just making sure things stay running, don't change things you're not authorized to change. As you move up in the company, like Steve Jobs, being a leader and coming up with wild ideas, let's call them, creativity, and inspiring people to do amazing things, doesn't always have an immediate, like, it's going to bring the warehouse down in an hour. Like Steve Jobs probably had a lot of great creativity ideas as an inspired leadership, but it probably didn't halt manufacturing within 30 minutes because of some mistake in his great leadership idea. Some low-level employee being creative and deciding to change how the conveyor belt speed works relative to the output of the machine could bring down the whole factory. So bad place to be creative.
Yeah, indeed. And following in your factory floor example, it's like you're in charge of put on the wheel drive into a car. So instead of put on the left side for America, you decided to put on the right side as if it were for England or Japan. So it will be totally Mexican. So in those kinds of job positions, you cannot be creative. You have to stick to the process. These guys are on an automotive mindset all the time, doing the same, which it will be maybe a lot of boring, but it has to be done in those kind of job positions. And the opposite, talking about Steve Jobs, when I read his biography, he mentioned, the author mentioned that Steve Jobs put specific people in certain situations in a bubble. So when they say, okay, we require the iPad, the iPhone to be, rather than a square edges over here, but more smoothly, they put on people over there, and they did amazing job. In this case, you to do it, but you have to identify, and it is, as I mentioned before, you as a human leader have to identify several things. First of all, which job positions can do creativity and those that they cannot. Which projects can be done with creativity and which cannot be done, or maybe not projects at a full, but there is a specific problem that we cannot manage to overcome. Either you give it to the highest creativity guy or gal to fix it, or you give it to the guy with a senior or a lead job position to fix it. In this case, you have to be very thorough about this.
Yes, and I agree. And inspiring, trying to lean towards leadership, right? To give opportunities. I think that in general, most people enjoy work more, right, when they're given opportunities to invent new things or improve things and make contributions versus I'm just going to follow my recipe and do step 1, step 2, step 3. In your humane leadership, when you're trying to do that, don't over participate in the creativity part. In other words, you can plant seeds, you can inquire and drive and try and give them opportunities, but don't throw your ideas into the mix, at least not initially. I always found when, even though I got a great idea that I think would work, I would not mention it right away. Maybe depending on the length of the project and what we're working on, sometimes that might mean waiting 20 minutes to present my suggestion, or maybe it might mean presenting it in 2 weeks, depending on, again, how long things are taking. But give those people time to think about the problem, ask insightful questions, maybe to steer it a little bit, to give them wisdom that you have for things maybe you've experienced that you know won't work, or reasons why certain things might not be great avenues. But in general, your leadership as a humane leader for these creative situations is to give them room, give them support, let them know what their constraints are. Hey, you can use this amount of time to come up with the idea. It can't be more than this expensive, can't be bigger than this size, those kinds of things, that are kind of management-like, in terms of cost, et cetera. But then it's let them start generating the ideas, and don't squash the bad ones right away. Maybe the bad one is a good idea, it just needs a little adjustment. So just say, okay, that's an interesting idea. Don't call it bad. It's an interesting idea. Let's note that one down. How does it fit into our other criteria in terms of cost, speed to implement, et cetera, whatever our requirements are? Let's get some more ideas, and continue that kind of open brainstorming without picking a winner too quickly, and again, like I said at the beginning, don't share your own personal input right away, because this is an opportunity for them to grow. And if you're basically brainstorming the loudest and the fastest first because you got the most experience, then your junior members of the team don't get an option to participate or learn.
Yeah, let me tell you, how do I set up my engineering or tech team within a startup? Let's say that we are maybe less than 20 or 50 people within the company. So instead of having a vertical organization, I always have a horizontal organization in which anybody within the team to bring a new idea. And there could be 3 outcomes. The first one, I could say, my God, it's amazing. Let's implement it. Let's have a deployment. The second one to be, guess what? Your arguments aren't as strong as they should be. I think the idea requires some polish. Please go back and bring me with more hard data or something related to either engineering or the business. And the third one is no, and I will tell you the reasons. And it is because we have tried before, because of our business model won't allow it, everything. So in the end, people know that they can reach me. I have an open communication with them. And this leadership to be in this communication, but also management as well. Because if I say no and I explain the reasons, they will understand better.
Yes, yeah. And it's that delicate balance of, when you're the most senior person, you've got 20 more years of experience, there's insights and wisdom that you've gained over that time that, unfortunately, they just don't have yet. So you definitely need to use very humane leadership techniques of communicating. Don't feel, you shouldn't be squashing their ideas like bugs. You want to gently let it down. That is a brilliant idea, Roberto. I really like it. I'm concerned about how that might scale from our current, pilot test base of 500 people to our future target of having 1 million people on this. How do you think that might scale? And so then you start to inspire them to think of some of the restrictions versus just telling them, look, I know when you scale it to 1 million users, it's going to cost us $500 per user per month to support. That'll never work because we're only going to charge them $1 to use it. So, you don't, that second part might be a true fact, but if you're being a humane leader and inspiring them to learn how to think through their creative solution, is to weave in that cost and weave in, hey, investigate that a little bit more and come back to me. You may know the answer. And as long as you've got some time that they can spend investigating it and doing some cost analysis, let them go do the cost analysis and let them come back and tell you, hey, I looked at it. It'd be way too expensive. We'll have to come up with a less expensive way to do that. I like the idea. We just need a cheaper way to do it. Brilliant, Roberto. Go work on that. See if you can come up with a less expensive way to do it. Now you've inspired the person. You didn't squash the idea. You inspired them to, do some more creativity things around economics, which can be tough to be creative with economics.
Yeah, indeed. And one thing that I want to ask you is, were you not as a manager, but were you, when you weren't a manager yet, being creative or wanting to be creative with a solution, and your either leader or manager told you to hold your horses, when even though you thought it was the good one?
Well, one, remember that was a really long time ago. So memories sometimes are a little bit inaccurate. But I mean, I can remember my very first manager, Dennis O'Brien. Oh my God, he was just a great boss. Not boss, great humane leader. Sorry, slip. Amazing. And I try to stay in touch with him every once in a while, even now. He's long retired, but just a wonderful person. And he actually would give me time to create. So in other words, we'd be working on operational things and getting things out to our user community. But he's like, I really want you to think of a new way to do certain things. And one of the big things was we had rolled out email. This is the very early stages of email systems, and we had deployed it, but believe it or not, the email tools did not have an address book. Today, you'd be like, what? How could that even be such a thing? But way back when email started, there was no such thing as an address book. And I came up with a macro that we could work on our PCs that developed a pick list that I could maintain for doing an address book. And it was those kinds of inspiring things that gave you energy to do a lot of the other things that were just day-to-day operational. Hey, I got to back up the SIF server. I got to teach a class on how to use some software. Very operational kinds of things. But he would always try and carve out time for, hey, we got another problem. Let's brainstorm about this a little bit. What do you think we could do? And that's one of the first ones I remember, was him carving out time and saying, look, and believe it or not, this was early work at home. He's like, people come to you for too much help when you're here at the office. I watch them go into your office constantly for getting help. Go take the portable computer, go home and work on this so you're not interrupted. And, it's those kinds of leadership experiences that inspire you in the future to do the same things.
Nice. And nice recognition to this humility that you had. Let me tell you the example that I had. When I was several pounds lighter, when the gray and white hair wasn't in me, I think it was my mid-20s. And I was first, when I got to a bank, I was first in a tech support department, and I didn't enjoy it. I'm a more of a software guy than a hardware guy. And but then we weren't using Excel. We were using Lotus 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so I remember that.
Yeah,
that's dating you. You're old then.
Okay, I'll continue. Okay. And I told my manager that we shouldn't use a spreadsheet to have everything, all tools to us, because we have to almost on a daily basis to say, okay, I took 20 meters of this table, I used 4, I have 16, and it was process so a burden, you know. And I told him, what about we create an application and we do it? And he yelled at me. He told me, no, your job is to do yada, yada, yada. So 2 months later, I was transferred to a new department. And this guy, Luis, Luis El Signo, he told me, yeah, man, let's do it. I think it will provide a lot of value to the tech support teams within the bank. Because it were like, I think it were like 30, 40 people. In that case, it were big. And I didn't build it, but at least my idea was heard. And someone else with higher expertise, proficiency did it. And I feel really good because I understood that I have some boundaries and limits, but my idea was heard and recognized, and it was built. So even though you might not provide that project to that specific person, at least bring recognition of, at first, how a good idea it is, and second, hey, this application was based on the idea Roberto provided.
And you mentioned something very key there, which was the recognition aspect of it. So the humane leader, even though you may be in a role where you have to do 80% management tasks, 20% leadership, acknowledge when the management things go well, recognize that and say, you know, Roberto, you know, I know we've got a lot of these operational tasks to do, but look, you know, so many operational jobs completed successfully, or 100%, or whatever the, you know, the goals and metrics around the things where you have to be management versus an inspiring leader. Recognize that stuff, because that's what boosts the morale of the whole team. And that kind of boost in morale when you need creative ideas and you need to be executing your own leadership skills to inspire the team. That previous work you did by doing recognition of good execution on things, you know, helps the employee morale. And I have never seen creative teams do well when they have bad morale. Never. If morale is bad, their enthusiasm to participate is poor, it's low. The creative juices are just not there for being creative and inspiring. You know, I know we're primarily talking about leadership versus management, but a big thing in that inspiring leadership is knowing that when you've got to do management stuff, make sure you're doing your recognition so that it's kind of like charging the battery for when you need to do leadership things that inspire them to do creative and new things.
So, yes, sir, indeed. Basically, it is a fuel that people will get to become motivated, even though if you're not around.
Exactly. You're just kind of priming the engine. You're making sure the battery's charged, and that's something that a humane leader thinks about all the time. Is that you're constantly making sure you're doing something to keep the battery up to its peak performance, because you don't, again, even in primarily development roles, it isn't all 100% creative leadership all the time. It's just not. There are management level things you need to do in almost every job. So striking the balance is critical. I think Steve Jobs, you know, at that very, very high level could be leadership and inspiring level a much greater percentage of his workday, but recognize that, you know, sometimes you have to do management, and there's a good way to do management so that you feed the ability to be creative and act like a leader, which is, you know, recognition, making sure people know that even though it's a repetitive task, they're doing it very well. They're doing it the best they can. You're making metrics that are top notch, And so now when you come to them for that inspiring leadership, creative solution to some problem, their energy is up for it.
Oh, yeah. And my final thought about this episode, it is, I spoke 2 weeks ago with a chef, and he told me that if you're going to do sugarly plates, you have to stick to the recipe. You cannot move because it will be either too much sugar or too less sugar. But if you're creating salty plates, you dip it in, add it, okay, add this, add that, taste it, etc. But when you go to the sugarly plates, if you want someone to create a new chocolate cake or a mango souffle or something like that with a sensory experience, you let them do it. So understand where you are and what you want to do.
Agreed. Very good discussion. Again, I think Steve Jobs is inspiring in many ways. So as long as we focus on the positive things, we can inspire our teams regardless of whether they have operational roles, development roles, creative roles. We can inspire them to do great things.
Indeed. Well, I think with this, we should end this episode.
Very good. Talk to you next